So in this video I'll be showing you how to use a jeweler saw, and how to precisely cut through metals, without breaking a bunch of your blades. But first I need to tell you about who supplied me with all these tools, and the sponsor of this video, which happens to be AutoFry. Just about every tool in this video was supplied by them. So if you're looking for high quality tools at affordable prices, or maybe you're just looking for some silver or some stones, head over to autofry.com, and they have a large selection of tools, stones, findings, and just about everything you would need for jewelry making. I'll leave a link in the description along with a discount code so you can save some money on your orders. Alright, so let's get back into the video. So there's quite a few different saw frames to choose from, and not to mention different sizes. These are adjustable German saw frames, and this is probably one of the most common saw frames you'll see. They can be adjusted so you can use different lengths of saw blades, or you can use saw blades that have broken as long as they still have a decent amount of teeth on them. As you can see with these are both non-adjustable, so if you break a saw blade, you have to replace it with a new one. So you might be wondering why there's 3 different sizes of this same saw frame. Well, this is because each one can be used to cut a different distance into a metal. Say we want to cut this piece of brass completely in half long ways. Well, if we use the 8-inch saw frame, we could do just that in one go. But if you wanted to do the same thing with a 3-inch, you would have to cut from one side and then cut from the other, and then we would still have a small piece in the center that we couldn't cut. So you're probably thinking, why not just use an 8-inch one all the time? And that's exactly what I thought also. But there are some drawbacks to it. One drawback is it's pretty big and it can get in your way. Another problem is it's pretty long, so if it moves on the end, you can mess up your cut and it makes your cuts a lot less accurate. So making a straight line for some people is very difficult with one of these. So the 3-inch frame seems to be a lot more stable than the 8-inch one, and people find this one a lot easier to work with. The only thing is you're limited on the size of metals you're using, so if you use large pieces like I do, this won't really help you. But when it comes to silver sheet metal, I only order it in 3x3 and 6x3 inch pieces. That means that a 3-inch saw blade should work perfectly fine with both of those. And the biggest saw frame I should need is only a 6-inch one, not 8. But German saw frames aren't the only ones that you can get your hands on. For instance, this is a Green Lion Studio saw frame. So unlike the German saw frames, this has no adjustments whatsoever. But it does seem like it adds a lot more tension to your saw blades, which means that you're going to be way more precise than if you have a blade that bends and moves on you. So other than saw frames, you're going to need saw blades. So saw blades come in a variety of different sizes with different teeth. This is due to them being able to cut through different thicknesses of metal, and you need to know which ones work best with which metals. So here's a list of all of the saw blades and all the metals that they are meant to cut through. I'll also be putting this in a blog post on my website, so you can download this image there, along with a list of all the tools in this video and links to where to get them. So one other thing you're going to need for your jeweler saw setup is a bench pin. So they come in all the different shapes and sizes, but this is the most common version right here. And this version comes completely uncut, so you can cut your own patterns into it depending on what you're going to be using it for and what you like your setup to be. Or you can get one that's already pre-done. And here's my old bench pin that you can tell has a lot of wear and tear to it, and a lot of holes that I've drilled through it. So I want to flatten this back out, and to do that I'm just going to switch over to a new bench pin. And on the new pin, I'll be changing up my cut-in design. No matter what pin you decide to use, you need some way of mounting it to your desk or workbench. I personally like the ones that have a built-in anvil. It provides a really sturdy work surface for hammering or just working on pieces in general. And the whole setup is pretty easy. It just has a screw clamp on the back, and you put your pin in and basically just screw it down to your table or work area. So if you want a real bang for your buck, you're going to want to get this one though. It has a larger work surface than the other one, and you might notice that it has this weird screw thing on the side and this hole right here. This is actually to mount a ring mandrel to it, so you don't have to hold it while working with it, which is actually really good for shaping and hammering your rings. And it comes with an oval bracelet mandrel, so this is basically 4 tools in one. And I believe this set actually costs less than buying each one of these individually. So if you're planning to do a lot of sawing and making rings, along with making bracelets, then I highly suggest getting one of these. So you might have noticed this piece of wood I have right here that is just kind of bolted down to my bench. Well, this is here to create an overhang because I have nowhere on my bench to actually mount any clamps. So just keep in mind you need something to attach the bench pin to. So if your desk doesn't have anything to do that with, you can always add a piece of wood like this. So attaching it to your bench is pretty straightforward. You just have to take your pin and put it inside of your anvil clamp. I like to use it with the flat side up, but a lot of people seem to like the curved side, so it really depends on what you're doing and what your preference is. Once you have it attached, make sure it's all nice and sturdy and it doesn't wiggle around. Seeing that this pin is brand new and has no cut in it, I'm going to show you how I draw a pattern and cut it out. As you saw in my last one, I like to have a V pattern in here, but this one I'm going to be adding a circle at the top of it, so I have more surface area to work with. I'll explain why that's really helpful once I start showing how to use the saw frame and cutting the metal. So I'm just going to add a center point and then use a ruler to make a V shape out of it. The next thing I'm going to want to do is make a hole similar to the one on this other pin. If you happen to have a drill bit the size that you want the hole to be, go ahead and use that. It'll be a lot quicker, but I don't happen to have a drill bit this size, so I'm going to be cutting it out using the saw. But before I cut this out, I'm going to show you how to set a saw blade into the saw frame. So if you're using a German saw frame, it's going to be completely closed like this when you first get it. Go ahead and grab whatever saw blade you're going to be using. To cut through this wood, I'm going to be using a number 3 blade. So you're going to want the teeth on the saw blade to be facing outwards, and then they also need to be pointing down. The saw blade teeth can be extremely small, and if you don't have good eyesight, you're going to need some sort of magnifying glass to see them. Also be extremely careful with these blades because they can cut right through your hand with ease. So just extend your saw frame all the way out and loosen the bottom screw on the saw frame. And then just place your saw blade into it and tighten it back down. So now all we have to do is adjust the saw frame so it barely touches the top of the saw blade, then tighten down the back screw to lock it in place. Now all you have to do is loosen up the top screw and make sure to line up the saw blade so it lines up with the inside of the clamping area. Then you're going to want to take the top of your saw frame and push it into your workbench while you hold on to the handle. Or if you're not strong enough to do this with just your arms, you can actually push it up against your chest and use your own body weight against it. Once you see that the saw blade is in between the clamp, you can now tighten down the tightening screw. If you did everything right, the blade should be extremely tight and it shouldn't really be able to move, and you can actually kind of strum this like a guitar string and it'll make a really high-pitched sound. So to do this part, I'm going to only use a jeweler saw, and I'm going to teach you a couple little techniques that you're going to be using on metal on the wood, which will be a lot softer and a little more forgiving than the metal will be. To start your cut, make sure that your blade is lined up with the line that you're going to be cutting, and you're going to want to draw the blade upwards to make a little bit of a notch so you have a guide to start cutting your piece. It's also easier to do this if your blade is at an angle, and if you're having problems with the blade staying on one spot, you can actually place your thumb or a finger on the back of the blade and it will not cut you. Once you have that notch, you can then angle your blade to about a 90-degree angle with the piece that you're cutting. And then to cut through this, you just apply a very little bit of pressure to the blade as you move it up and down. If you apply too much pressure to the blade, it can start chattering and getting stuck, or it could just straight up break. So as you cut your material, it's going to make sawdust on the top of it, and this is going to cover up your lines. So you'll need to clean off the sawdust so you can see what you're doing. To do this, you can easily just blow it off, wipe it off with your finger, or keep a brush nearby to brush it away. So going from a straight line to a curve like this, you can't just turn the blade and start cutting. So to make this turn, you have to keep moving your blade up and down just in one spot, and then slowly rotate the blade, or the piece if you can. Because if you don't do this, or if you do it too fast, you'll just break your blade. You can kind of think of this like driving a car or riding a bike. If you turn your wheel when you're not moving whatsoever, it doesn't matter how much you turn the wheel, nothing's going to happen. But if you're moving, then you can actually start to turn and control where you're going. And of course, the motions aren't the same, but the idea is. So I'm going to run into a problem here if I continue to cut with this saw. The saw won't be able to go past this, so I won't be able to cut anymore. And this is actually a problem that you can run into when you're using pieces of metal that are bigger than your saw frame. But I'll still be able to finish this cut. All I need to do is remove the saw blade from the material and then start from the other side. And there's two ways to remove the saw from the material. One, you could just saw backwards, or you can just undo the top release and pull the saw out from the bottom, and then just reset the saw into the saw frame, and then just continue to cut the other side. Now that that's all cut out, it's ready to be used. So now I'm going to switch over to the Green Lion Studio saw frame, and then I'll be using that one to show you how to cut metal. Setting the blade into this one is exactly the same as the German style, besides you don't have to adjust it to fit your blade. So when cutting your metal, you need some sort of design or layout to follow. I like to use a sticky paper that's basically just a label paper that I print out designs onto and then cut them out and stick them to my metal. You can do the same thing with just normal printer paper and a glue stick, or you can even just draw directly onto the metal and then cut that out. You can also use a pair of dividers and use the straight edge of your metal, and this way you can make really quick and easy bands for rings. So whatever way you choose will work, just as long as you have some sort of pattern on the metal. So I'll be cutting out this little Triforce symbol to show how to do piercing cuts also, because the center of this needs to come out, and you can't just cut into it to remove it and keep everything in one piece. So what I'm going to do is use a center punch on the piece that I need to cut out, and I'm just going to use that with a hammer, and then once I hammer it the first time, flip it over and find the mark on the back and hammer through it again, and it should knock out the piece in the center, so you'll have a hole. Or you can just hammer it the one time and use a drill bit to drill through it. I just wanted to show that you can make a hole using a center punch, but you're going to dull your center punch out this way if you do this all the time. So once you have your hole, you're going to want to put your saw blade through it. The way I like to do this is I keep the bottom part of my saw blade attached to the saw frame, and then feed the saw blade through the back of the piece, and then reset my blade. Once I have all that set up, I need to lubricate my blade. You're going to want to lubricate your blade pretty often so it stays as sharp as possible and it doesn't give you a bunch of resistance. And it also helps you not break as many blades. So when using your saw, you're going to want to be sitting down, but you're also going to want your bench pin to be low enough down that you can see everything that you're doing, and so that your arms are comfortable. To start this piece off, you can really just cut in any direction, but I'm going to be cutting directly towards one of the side lines. And as soon as I get to the side line, I'm going to use the technique I showed on the wood piece, which is move the blade up and down and slowly turn it. And this will just change your angle so you can start going around the actual line work of your piece. And you'll have to do this in every corner. So once again, I'm running into the same problem of the saw frame hitting the metal that I'm cutting. So what I'm going to do is cut out half of the triangle and then switch up my angling on the blade and cut out the other half. So another thing you have to be careful of is if you bend your metal too much, you can actually break your saw blade, like I just did right now. Just always keep in mind that these saw blades are extremely thin and very brittle, and luckily pretty inexpensive. Once you have the center part or parts cut out, you can then start cutting out the outside piece. So I'd like to cut off whatever piece is closest to the edge first, and then I'll cut out the rest of the piece. The reason why I do this is I feel it has more support when it has more metal to be cut out from. So this Triforce piece was to show how to do a piercing cut, how to cut straight lines, and how to change angles. If this is your very first time using the jeweler saw, or if you're just not that good with it, I would suggest cutting out shapes. And just try to cut out the shapes as accurate as possible. Anything from squares, triangles, and circles, just so you can get the feel down and make sure that your accuracy is spot on. And then you could start moving up to other highly detailed things. Also, once you cut something out with the jeweler saw, it leaves a slight burr on the piece, and it can be kind of sharp, and it has a weird texture to it. You can use a file on these parts and smooth them all out, or you could use a Dremel tool and clean them all up. So the next piece I'll be showing you how to cut out is a little snail, and I actually got this pattern from SweetNovemberJewelry on Instagram. They cut out a lot of silhouettes and just tiny pieces in general and turn them into stud earrings and other little pieces of jewelry. If you want to see more of their work, just check out SweetNovemberJewelry on Instagram. I'll also leave a link in the description below. And while I'm at it, I'm going to switch over this bench pin to the other one. I want to show how you can use the other areas on that other bench pin to cut out pieces that are super small like this. So I'm just going to be using this small hole right here. The reason for this is it's going to support the most amount of my metal and give me enough room to cut all this little details in. And if this piece isn't supported well, you can actually snag it and bend the piece or snag it and break your blade. So just like before on the wood when I went around the circular part of it, you're going to be moving this and turning at the same time. It's also very similar to how you change angles, but you're just making a curve instead. Also, when you have a smaller piece of metal like this, or really any piece of metal, you need to support it so it doesn't lift up like this. So you can put your fingers on either side of the blade, and it should keep your piece down and level the whole time. And just like the wood, this is going to make sawdust, but it's going to be made of whatever metal you're cutting. And you'll be able to clean it off the same exact way. You can either just blow it off, use a brush, or just wipe it away with your fingers. Just be careful when you wipe it away with things, because you can actually rub off the pattern. So these first two pieces that I cut out are a little more difficult of pieces to cut out for a beginner or first time using these. But that's why I have these next couple that show how you can practice on very cheap materials and become a lot more comfortable with the saw. So here's the snail fully cut out, and basically the entire thing is just a bunch of curved lines. So one of the ways I liked to practice when I first started using the jeweler saw was to use coins, especially pennies, considering they only cost me 1 cent to use. So to practice with the coin, all you need to do is figure out what you're going to be cutting out of the coin. So I'll be cutting out the entire body and head of Lincoln, and do that, and then do it over and over again, or try to cut out different areas or any of the background area. So you'd have to drill a hole or use a center punch to make a hole in this penny, and then cut out all the area around Lincoln and then leave the outer band. And this way you can practice different techniques for almost nothing, considering that pennies in the US are pretty much useless now. Oh, and here's a little trick that I figured out after cutting myself, I don't know, countless times when finishing cuts like this. So when your blade is about to come out of the piece, a lot of times it kind of just shoots out. And if your finger's in the way and you're still pulling down, it's going to cut your finger. So to not have this happen, all you need to do is keep the end of the metal and the blade as close as possible to the wood. And when it does shoot out, it'll hit the wood first and not your finger. As soon as I figured this out and actually started using it, I don't think I've cut myself with the blade since then. But if you don't want to use coins, or if you can't use coins where you are, you can always just use a piece of sheet metal to practice on. If you have a sheet of metal that has a perfectly straight line on it, you can use a pair of dividers and scratch in a couple lines and practice cutting perfectly straight lines. If you don't have that, you can use a ruler and a pen and draw straight lines and cut with that. I feel the best way to get comfortable with the jeweler saw blade and be able to actually do more delicate and intricate pieces is just to practice with it a lot. So just keep in mind, this is an actual skill that you're going to learn, and you're going to have to practice at it if you want to be able to do very intricate pieces, or just you don't want to be breaking blades all the time. Also, make sure to practice with some zigzag and squiggly lines so you can get down curves and changing angles. So you can also use your jeweler saw to cut tubing and wire. And there's some interesting tools that go along with these, so you can cut some angles into them that you otherwise probably wouldn't be able to do just by hand. For example, this miter cutting vise. Normally you'd place your material through this and use a file to file it completely flush with it. But you can also use a jeweler saw with this and make that a lot faster and then finish it off with some filing. All you need to do is put your material inside of it and then tighten down the thumb screws on top. Then just make sure that your saw blade is flush with the vise, And make sure none of your fingers are sticking out from here, and then you could just cut the piece off. And if sawing leaves any type of burr, make sure to go over it real quick with a file, and you'll have this done in a couple seconds. And this can be done with almost all of your materials as long as they fit inside of the vise. You could also use something like this saw jig that cuts in different angles, or there's another one that is a tube cutter that only cuts in 90 degrees, but you can cut and measure different lengths of tube or wire. They both pretty much work exactly the same. All you need to do is put your tubing or wire into it, flip down the little lever to hold it in place and keep pressure onto it, and then use your jeweler saw to cut through the tube or wire. The tube cutter version of this, and this one to a certain extent, is very good for cutting pieces of wire to the same exact size over and over again, if you need to have a consistent size of wires. And I'll be showing more about that in a different video. Well, that's about it for this video. If you found it helpful at all, please feel free to leave a thumbs up. If you happen to have any questions or suggestions for future videos, leave a comment below. If you want to be alerted whenever I upload a new video, subscribe to my channel. I try to upload new videos every week. And feel free to check out some of the videos that are up on the screen now. Well, thanks for watching and see you guys next time. Bye.